I hadn't been back to my hometown in years, but after the breakup with Lila, I needed a fresh start. Or maybe I just wanted to escape. The coastal air was supposed to bring me peace, a way to clear my mind. I thought being around familiar places, old friends, and my childhood home would help me forget what happened. But the moment I walked those quiet streets again, memories of her came flooding back. Lila had always been intense. Started out with small things, checking my phone, asking where I was all the time. But by the end, it was like she had to control every part of me. I'd blocked her number the day we split, trying to erase her from my life for good. One afternoon, I was digging through old boxes in the attic when I found my old phone, the one I used back when we were together. Out of curiosity, I powered it up. There were dozens of messages from her that I'd forgotten about. They were strange. At first, the usual possessiveness, but some of them were fragmented, incomplete thoughts. Unsettling. It was like reading a different side of her I hadn't noticed before. Something didn't feel right even after all this time. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the past. It had been months since I'd even thought about Lila. I figured she was long gone, moved across the country like she said she would. We hadn't spoken in over a year, so when my phone buzzed with a message from her number, my heart stopped. Do you remember the cliffs? We were always meant to meet there again. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. That wasn't possible. It had to be a prank. Maybe one of my friends found her number or somehow dug up my old messages. But why? And how? I shook my head, trying to dismiss it, but something about the message stuck with me. The cliffs. That was our spot. A place we used to go when we needed to get away from everything. Only she would know that. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was some stupid coincidence, but the messages didn't stop. Every night, around the same time, a new one would appear, each more cryptic than the last. The pier, do you remember? The sunset there. We always went to the cafe. You never liked their coffee, but I did. At first, they felt almost nostalgic, but there was something off about them. The words felt wrong, like they weren't really coming from her. They were short, empty, but they clawed at something deep inside me. A growing sense of dread settled in my gut. Was Lila really watching me? Following me? The more I tried to ignore it, the more paranoid I became. Felt like she was everywhere, lurking just beyond my vision. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The messages kept coming, every night without fail. I tried to block her number, but somehow they still found their way through. Each time I heard my phone buzz, it felt like a jolt of electricity down my spine. I couldn't sleep anymore, couldn't focus. Everywhere I went, I had this creeping sensation of being watched. I started seeing things, shadows, figures at the edge of my vision. But when I turned to look, there was nothing. My friends told me I was being paranoid, reminded me that Lila was long gone, miles away from here. But it didn't matter what they said. It felt like she was close, closer than anyone realized. I needed answers. I couldn't just sit around waiting for the next cryptic message, feeling like I was losing my mind. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I started visiting the places mentioned in the text. The pier, where we used to watch the sunset, was my first stop. It should have been peaceful, but the whole place felt wrong. The wind felt colder, the water darker. And even though no one was around, I could swear I felt eyes on me, watching from somewhere just out of sight. Next, I went to the cafe we used to go to. I sat at our old table, looking out the window at the empty street. It was as if every place we once shared was tainted now, each memory twisted. There was nothing obvious out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was lurking just beyond the surface. It was like she was waiting for me to figure something out. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, another message came through. There's something you never knew. Go to the cliffs. My heart raced. The cliffs. I knew I shouldn't go, but I had no choice. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to stop until I faced it. I drove to the cliffs that night, the message from Lila repeating in my head. There's something you never knew. The sky was overcast, and the air felt thick with something I couldn't explain, like the world was holding its breath. As I reached the edge of the cliffs, the memories came flooding back. We used to come here often, back when things were still good. But then, I remembered that night, one of the last times we were here together. Lila had been quiet, more than usual. She kept talking about secrets, how our relationship was deeper than I understood, how there were layers I couldn't see. I thought it was just her usual cryptic nonsense back then. But now I wasn't so sure. Another message buzzed through. I'm still here, waiting for you. My skin prickled. I scanned the cliffs, looking for any sign of her, half expecting to see her standing there, smiling that unsettling smile she used to give when she was trying to get inside my head. But there was nothing, only the sound of the wind whipping against the rocks below. Something caught my eye, a small pile of rocks near the edge. I knelt down and began to move them, my heart pounding in my chest. Underneath was a small, weathered box. I hesitated before opening it, but I couldn't stop myself. Inside were things I recognized. Lila's necklace, the one she always wore, a few old photos of us together. But there was also a journal. My hands trembled as I flipped through it, the words revealing more than I ever wanted to know. Pages of her obsession, her need for control, but worse. Dark entries hinting at something far more sinister. The final page made my blood run cold. If you're reading this, I never left. I've always been here, watching you. There's something I didn't tell you. I'll see you soon. Suddenly, I heard a rustling behind me. My heart jumped into my throat as I turned. A figure stood just beyond the trees, unmoving, watching. My phone buzzed one last time. I didn't need to look to know what it said. Don't turn around.
Moving into the new apartment felt like a breath of fresh air. It was small but cozy, tucked away in a quiet corner of a college town. After everything I went through with Tom, I needed this. The breakup had been ugly. He was obsessive, constantly needing to know where I was, what I was doing. It was suffocating, and I was glad to finally be free. I unpacked boxes with a sense of excitement, imagining a new life without him. As I was sorting through my clothes, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. That blue sweater looks nice on you. Moving suits you. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced around, but the street outside seemed empty. Probably a prank, I told myself. But later that evening I saw him, Tom, standing outside watching. I felt my stomach turn. When I went out to confront him, he just shrugged and said, "I was just checking on you." I told him to leave me alone. The whole thing felt wrong. The moment he left, I called a locksmith. There was no way I was spending another night with those old locks. At first, I tried to convince myself the messages were just a fluke, maybe someone playing a stupid prank. After changing the locks, I felt safer. But then the messages kept coming, worse, more detailed. Days would go by, and I'd start to feel like things were normal again, only to have my phone buzz at the most unsettling moments. Heading out to the coffee shop again. "You really like that vanilla latte, don't you?" I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. I hadn't told anyone where I was going that morning. The message was too specific, too close. My eyes scanned the street, but no one stood out. It was like someone was there, watching, blending into the background. The messages became constant. They knew everything. What time I left my apartment. You really shouldn't leave the window open at night. What I ate for dinner. Pasta again. You've been eating that a lot lately. Even the smallest details, like when I hung out with my friends. Your laugh is different around them. Are you really happy? Paranoia started creeping in. I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were always on me. Jake, my neighbor, had been nice at first. He helped me carry in some boxes when I first moved in, and we exchanged friendly hellos in passing. But now I felt uneasy around him. He was too friendly, always asking about my day, how I was settling in. I caught myself wondering if it was him sending the messages, watching me from his apartment across the hall. I started avoiding eye contact with people, questioning every glance from a stranger on the street. It felt like no matter what I did, someone was always a step ahead, knowing exactly where I was and what I was doing. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a cold dread, knowing it would be another reminder that someone was out there, watching too closely. That night I tried to relax. I went out with friends, hoping to shake the paranoia that had been clinging to me like a shadow. We laughed, talked about classes, and for a few hours I almost felt normal again. But the dread returned as soon as I walked back to my apartment building. Something felt off before I even reached the door. My breath hitched when I saw it. The front door was slightly ajar. My hands shook as I pushed it open. The living room was a mess. Drawers yanked open, clothes scattered, books thrown onto the floor. Someone had gone through everything. Every private detail of my life laid bare. My heart pounded in my chest, a loud thudding that drowned out everything else. I moved through the apartment in a daze, trying to understand what had just happened. In a panic, I grabbed my phone, hoping to call the police. But before I could dial, a notification popped up. It was from that same unknown number. I hesitated, dread pooling in my stomach, but I opened the message. It was a video of me. I was asleep in my bed, the camera angle shaky but unmistakable. It was taken from inside my apartment. My breath caught in my throat as I watched myself, completely vulnerable, unaware that someone had been standing just feet away from me, filming me while I slept. My skin went cold. I felt sick, the room spinning around me. Whoever had been sending the messages had been here, inside my home, watching me in my most private moments. And now, they had been close enough to touch me while I was completely unaware. My mind raced. Who could have done this? How did they get in? Was it Tom? Was it Jake? All I knew was that I was no longer safe. I couldn't stay in that apartment another second. The next morning I went straight to Tom's place, my mind racing. Had to be him. Who else would want to torment me like this? The messages, the break-in, it all made sense. When he opened the door, I confronted him, my voice trembling with fear and anger. You've been inside my apartment, haven't you? You're the one sending the messages. Tom looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? I haven't been near you since you told me to stay away. I wouldn't do this. His denial only made me angrier. But the look in his eyes, it wasn't the same obsessive gaze I remembered. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I was right. Could it really not be him? I left, feeling more lost than ever. Was I imagining things? Maybe the stress had finally gotten to me. But later that day, as I sat in my apartment, the walls closing in, I heard something. A voice through the thin walls, low but clear. Jake, my neighbor, was on the phone, and what I heard made my blood run cold. I don't think she suspects anything. Yeah, it's all set up. Tom's been covering for me perfectly. No, she hasn't caught on. She'll break soon. My heart stopped. Jake and Tom were working together. Jake had been the one inside my apartment, the one sending the messages, watching me. All while pretending to be helpful, friendly, the nice neighbor next door. My head swam as the pieces fell into place. The ransacked apartment, the video of me sleeping. Jake had been in my apartment the whole time. He was always there, always watching, right next door. The danger wasn't just from Tom or the past I was trying to escape. It was from Jake, living just feet away, manipulating me from the very beginning. I wasn't safe. Not from Tom. Not from Jake. Not from anyone. I needed to get away. After everything with Alex, the constant fighting, the lies, I just needed to breathe. That's how I ended up renting this cabin in the middle of nowhere. The drive here felt endless. Winding roads cutting through dense, dark trees, with no signs of life for miles. It was exactly what I thought I needed. Quiet, solitude. But the second I arrived, something felt off. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. It weighed on me like the air was too thick. That first night, I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to sleep, but I kept hearing these faint whispers outside. The wind, I told myself, has to be the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there. I glanced out the window and saw movement. Shadows shifting between the trees. It's just your imagination, I whispered to myself. But the unease settled deep in my chest, making it impossible to sleep. It was going to be a long night. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease from the night before. It's just nerves, I told myself again. After a quick breakfast, I decided to explore the cabin. It was old, but charming in a rustic way, with creaky wooden floors and the smell of pine lingering in the air. I was walking around the living room when something caught my eye. A loose floorboard near the fireplace. Curiosity got the best of me, and I pried it open. Inside, covered in dust, was a small, weathered diary. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded. Someone had lived here before, someone like me, searching for escape. I started reading. The entries were short, but the writer's pain bled through the words. They had fled to the cabin after leaving an abusive relationship. It was unsettling how familiar it all sounded. The desperation for peace, the hope that isolation would heal the wounds. But as I read on, something darker emerged. The writer spoke of seeing their ex out in the woods, watching them. Every night, they would see a figure moving through the trees, just beyond the cabin. My heart raced. This couldn't be real. But the more I read, the more I felt like I was reliving their nightmare. That night, the whispers came back, louder this time. And when I looked out the window, the shadows were there again, closer than before. They weren't just random shapes anymore. They had form, like someone was standing just at the edge of the forest, watching. The sense of being watched was suffocating. I felt like I was losing control, just like the person in the diary had. I tried to calm myself, but deep down I knew something was wrong. Something was out there. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. The whispers, the shadows, the eerie sense of being watched. I was losing my mind. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamed of faceless figures standing just beyond the tree line, waiting. I had come here to find peace, but all I'd found was fear. I decided I had to leave. I couldn't explain it, but something told me I wasn't safe here. Packing quickly, I kept glancing out the window, expecting to see someone, anyone, lurking in the distance. The morning light did little to ease the growing tension in my chest. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside, eager to put as much distance between me and the cabin as possible. But when I reached my car, my heart dropped. The windows were shattered, glass scattered across the ground, tires slashed. Panic clawed at my throat as I reached for my phone, only to find it dead. I knew I'd charged it the night before. My hands started to shake. This wasn't just bad luck. Someone had done this. Someone who didn't want me to leave. I stumbled back toward the cabin, my mind racing. How could I get out? No phone, no car. I was trapped. The air felt thicker, the silence heavier. I tried to breathe, but every inhale felt tight, like I was suffocating under invisible eyes. Then I heard it. A step. Slow, deliberate, crunching on the leaves just outside. I rushed to the window and saw a shadow, a figure, slipping between the trees, disappearing into the woods. My pulse thundered in my ears. Whoever had been watching me wasn't just some figment of my imagination. They were real, and they were getting closer. I was no longer alone. I couldn't stay in the cabin any longer. Whoever, or whatever, was out there wasn't going to let me leave easily. With no phone, no car, and no help coming, I had one option: find a way out on foot. I grabbed a flashlight and headed into the woods, hoping to find some sign of a road, a signal, anything. The forest was dense, every crackling twig and rustling leaf making my skin crawl. I walked for what felt like hours, weaving through the trees, until something caught my eye. A structure barely visible through the shadows. It was another cabin, hidden deep in the woods, dilapidated and forgotten. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. I pushed open the door, and the smell of mildew hit me. Inside, it looked abandoned at first. Then I saw the photographs, dozens of them pinned to the walls. Photos of me, the grocery store, walking down the street, sitting in my apartment. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what this meant. Alex. He had been watching me for months, planning this. The diary's warnings echoed in my head. He wasn't just stalking me. He had been living here, right under my nose, tracking my every move. But there was something else, something darker about this place. I could feel it, an oppressive energy that made the air heavy. It wasn't just Alex anymore. He had become something else, something twisted by the obsession. And then I heard him. His voice, low, menacing, came from the shadows, calling my name. Molly, you can't leave. He stepped out from the corner, but he wasn't the Alex I once knew. His face was distorted, eyes gleaming with something inhuman. I turned to run, but he was faster. We struggled, his grip ice cold, unnaturally strong. I fought back with everything I had, desperate to survive. I don't know how, but I managed to break free, fleeing through the woods, his voice chasing me, getting closer. By the time I reached the edge of the forest, I was bruised, breathless, but alive. But I'll never forget what I saw in his eyes. He wasn't just my ex anymore. He was something far worse, a nightmare that will haunt me forever.